Thanks a lot, society, for railroading my ass.
Aileen Wuornos' last interview is chilling for many reasons: rage, delusion, and a deep distrust of the system. It was an explosion of grievances, accusations against police. If her claims of torture were true, then it needed some serious actions. If not, she was highly delusional. It raises hard questions. Was she mentally fit to face execution? How did the legal system decide her fate despite warning signs? Were the psychiatric evaluations sound, or a rushed stamp of approval? Welcome back to Prison Stories. Today, we'll dissect the last interview of Aileen Wuornos. We will examine it through the lenses of her psychological breakdown, legal competency tests, and the moral implications. Was executing someone so mentally unstable a miscarriage of justice? Aileen Wuornos was born in Michigan in 1956 and endured a deeply troubled childhood marked by abuse and abandonment. She turned to sex work in her teens and, between 1989 and 1990, killed 7 men, claiming each act was committed in self-defense. In 1992, she was convicted and ultimately sentenced to death 6 times. From the start, the media dubbed her Florida's first female serial killer, painting her as a cold, hardened monster. Tabloids sensationalized her masculinity, sexuality, and violence, while the public demanded justice. But as her voice and story circulated, the narrative began to shift. Aileen Wuornos was branded Florida's first female serial killer, a tag that fueled intense media sensation. However, she never accepted that label. She consistently argued in court and interviews that what she did was self-defense. Her final interview is deeply chilling, not because she confesses, but because it unravels layers of distrust, delusion, and legal murkiness. It forces us to ask about her mental state, the psychiatric evaluations, the decision to execute, and whether justice truly served. Aileen was convicted in January 1992 for the murder of Richard Mallory. She claimed self-defense, but was sentenced to death 4 days later. By February 1993, she had pled guilty to 5 more murders and received her 6th death sentence. Her appeals began immediately. In September 1994, the Florida Supreme Court rejected all 8 claims she raised challenging her conviction. In 1995, the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear her case. Then, unexpectedly, in April 2002, after nearly a decade on death row, Wuornos voluntarily fired her lawyers and asked to drop her final appeals. The Florida Supreme Court approved, finding her mentally competent at that time. Despite her admitted intent to die and her claims of sanity, questions of her mental fitness surged. On October 2, 2002, Governor Jeb Bush lifted a temporary stay. 3 psychiatrists ruled her mentally competent to face execution. Yet just 1 day before her final on-camera breakdown, Wuornos failed a sanity test, and then a second panel within 30 minutes declared her legally sane. On October 8, she filed a last-minute motion for stay citing mental instability, but Florida Supreme Court denied it. Nick Broomfield gained access to Aileen Wuornos and conducted the interview on October 8, 2002, just hours before she was scheduled to be executed. The timing made it undeniably surreal. She was a condemned woman, already declared technically sane, yet here she was, confiding in a filmmaker about her dying mind. Broomfield himself found it chilling. Aileen Wuornos' final interview is unforgettable, burned into memory not just for what she said, but how she looked. Her face carried years of pain, rage, and psychological collapse. Her eyes, wide, dark, and unblinking, seemed to stare through the camera as if trapped between fury and fear. It wasn't just her eyes. Everything about her presence, the sudden cackles, jerky movements, the way she held herself, gave the impression of someone barely holding together. Her appearance alone raised disturbing questions. Was this the face of someone legally sane?
All right, I'm all right with it.
Before she said a word, Aileen Wuornos had already told a story, and it was terrifying. As the questions shift toward her trial, the police, and her perception of what happened, her tone changes rapidly. She grows agitated, accusatory, and paranoid. She says the police knew she had killed after her first victim and let her continue. In her words,
Let them know that I know that the cops knew who I was. After Richard Mallory died, I left prints everywhere, and they covered it up.
perhaps the most unsettling part of the interview were her repeated claims of being tortured and abused in prison. She claimed they were crushing her head with sonic pressure. She insists her food was being contaminated with dirt and urine.
Hey, I was tortured at BCI. They were using sonic pressure on my head since 1990.
She even said, when she tried report or complained, the pressure was increased to torture her more.
Spilicorda on it. Every meeting I had, she increased the pressure of the volume.
She was talking about conspiracies, claims that were too far-fetched, so had to be delusions. Whether they were right accusations or wrong against police had to be investigated. Even if they were not, it clearly stated her mental condition. She was in delusions, hallucinating. That becomes really tragic when we know she had passed a psychiatric test the day before.
I'm okay. I'm okay. God is going to be there. Jesus Christ is going to be there. All the
Then she pivots into religious imagery. She calls herself a Christ-like figure, a martyr. She says society crucified her. When Nick pressed more about her crimes, making her feel guilty, she lost it completely.
Something in you that was getting you to do
Oh, you
that.
are lost, Nick.
So
I was a
explain-
hitchhiking hooker.
Right.
At this point, her speech becomes erratic. Her words spiral into angry outbursts and disjointed accusations. She flips between calm and explosive in seconds. She starts to sound paranoid, but absolutely convinced she's telling the truth.
I lost my fucking life because of it. Couldn't even get a fair trial. Couldn't even get a fair investigation or nothing.
She was blaming everyone, society, system, police, for her condition. There can be a debate on whether her claims were right or wrong, but there can't be clearly on her mental condition. By the end, she's yelling, furious, betrayed, walking away mid-sentence and flipping off the camera crew. There is no goodbye, no last reflection, just rage and collapse.
You don't take fucking human life like this and just sabotage and rip it apart like Jesus on the cross. And say,
This wasn't a composed woman facing death. This was someone unraveling in real time, and it all happened just hours before her execution.
I'm glad. Thanks a lot, society, for railroading my ass.
The interview was over, but it left many questions. Even Nick Boomfield raised questions about her sanity.
It makes you wonder what you'd have to do to fail.
Just a day before this interview, Aileen reportedly failed a psychiatric evaluation. But within 30 minutes, another panel deemed her legally sane. That single decision sealed her fate. It allowed the state to proceed with her execution. But watching the footage, it's hard not to question that ruling. Her delusions, paranoia, erratic behavior, and emotional instability weren't hidden. They were visible, loud, and impossible to ignore. Aileen Wuornos was executed the very next morning, October 9th, 2002, at Florida State Prison in Rayford. She declined a special meal and instead requested a simple cup of coffee. At 9:47 a.m., she was strapped to the gurney. Witnesses describe her as calm, composed, almost detached from the moment. Psychologists, journalists, and even casual viewers have since argued that the system failed. Not just Aileen Wuornos, but the basic moral line between justice and vengeance. If a person is clearly not well, if they're emotionally broken and mentally collapsing, does the state still have the right to kill them? Aileen Wuornos opted death over life by firing her legal team fighting to save her. Her final words weren't of guilt or remorse. They were defiant, surreal, and unsettling. A woman once dubbed a monster left behind not just a body count, but a storm of unanswered questions about mental illness, justice, and what society does with the broken. She believed she was executed not for what she did, but for who she was, and how easy it was to turn her into a symbol. Even decades later, we're still debating the truth. Was Aileen Wuornos a manipulative killer, or a damaged soul who was never given a real chance? And more importantly, did we execute someone who had already lost her mind? Thank you for watching Prison Stories. If this left you thinking, like, share, and subscribe. Your voice keeps these stories alive. Let us know in the comments. Was this justice or a failure we still haven't come to terms with?